G'day guys. Well, it's been 2 years since I first introduced my first ever batch of Cephalotus, otherwise known as Albany pitcher plants. And these are the exact same plants right here. About 2 years ago, I produced a video. I was really excited because it was my first ever batch that I'd ordered. I didn't quite know what to expect because I hadn't grown these plants before. Well, I'm glad to say that over those couple of years, all the plants have grown, some more so than others, but overall I've been really happy with their success. So in this video I'm going to be sharing some of those important care guidelines that I've learned. It's by no means a comprehensive guide, but it's just something that I've learned along the way, and hopefully it's going to help you if you intend to grow these amazing Australian carnivorous plants at home. They really are one of a kind. My name is Jerry from Succulent Fly Traps. Okay, so I'm going to start off with this quite deep red cultivar. Now, funny enough, when I bought this, I seem to have lost the tags. I don't know exactly what the cultivar name is, but it's a very beautiful coloured Cephalotus. I love the variegation there on the inside of the lid. And of course, these pitchers have well-developed ribs, just pretty much like you do in Nepenthes, but they're covered in all these hairs here, and that sort of discourages insects such as ants from resting on the outside and encourages them to go into the pitcher. And of course, once they crawl around on the ribbing where it's slippery, a lot of the times they fall in, becoming food for the plant. So this one over here, it's very pretty. So this picture over here, it's only about, say, 1.5 centimetres long. But what I like about it is that it's got a lot of these smaller pitchers which are developing around the main stem or growth point. You've got this non-carnivorous leaf over here. So Cephalotus pretty much produce two types of leaves. You got the carnivorous leaves and you got the flat non-carnivorous leaves, and this is what you're seeing here. So pretty much the plant hasn't really grown out too much, but it's just grown all these pitchers around that flat leaf. And whilst it's not a big plant, it hasn't grown that much, I love the coloration, the variegation in this cultivar. It's really nice. Okay, so that's that one. Let's have a look at this other one. So here's another one over here. And this one's actually got 2 growth points. So this was my initial plant here, which I planted into the middle of the pot. And then over time, what's happened is that it's produced another growth point, not far away from the parent plant. It's just around about here. That's where the flat leaf is. So typically what happens is they have these underground runners or shoots, and up comes up a flat leaf, and then from that flat leaf you get these pitchers forming. Okay, so hasn't grown too much, but I'm so happy that they're still alive. I know I don't ask for very much, but because it's the first time I've grown these plants, I didn't expect very much, but the fact that they're still alive and not only they're producing pitchers, I'm very happy. Let's just turn that around a bit. You can see that flat leaf there and all these other pitchers. So these pitchers here are quite small. They're only about, say 3/4 of a centimetre. But they've got different colours in the lids of those pitchers, and overall I'm quite happy with it. Okay, so this is the last one, and this is the one that has exceeded my wildest expectations. Have a look at this. So all these plants received the same growing conditions. I had them growing outdoors. And in case you're wondering, this here aren't the roots of the plant, these are just wicking material. So I've basically used wicking material for these plants, and I'm going to get to that later on, but let's have a look at this plant over here. I love how the pitcher is just overhanging the edge of the pot. It really gives it a multi-dimensional look and feel to the pot plant. But you'll notice here how I've cut out a section of this pot. I'm going to get to that in a sec. But this was the original plant here. Again, it produced a lot of these smaller pitchers. So these pitchers here around about, again, 3/4 of a centimetre high. This one's a little bit bigger, it's about 1 centimetre high, that one. And over time, what's happened is that it's produced these underground runners or shoots. That's one of them over here. Let's have a look. Here's another one over there. Over here, it's quite a distance away from the parent plant. If you look carefully, you might see a flat leaf in there. I'm not sure whether you can. And this one over here is another growth point. There's a flat leaf, and out have come all these pitchers over here. Look at the different colours in those pitchers. Not only that, it's the angle of some of these pitchers. Some are pretty much vertical, others are a little bit at an angle, and others are pretty much flat. You have different sizes of pitchers as well. So this one over here is around about 2 centimetres high. These ones are slightly smaller, but that's what makes this plant so inviting to look at. It really does draw a lot of curiosity because of these pitchers. You know, they're beautiful in their own right, but the way they grow, the different colours in their pitchers, it really is a curious and beautiful plant to have in your collection. Okay, so over here, you'll notice, as I mentioned before, that I cut out a section of this pot. So around about 2.5 months ago, I noticed this flat leaf on the inside edge of this pot over here, okay? And I didn't think much of it at the time. I left it in there for a while, and I just assumed that maybe a leaf from another plant had landed on top of the peat moss. But when I realised that it stayed green, it didn't die off, I thought, well, hold on, maybe it might be part of the main plant. So what I did was, I sort of tried to pull it out gently, and I realised quickly that it was actually secure. So I knew that it had come from the parent plant over here. So I was very happy with that. But also, I was just curious to see what was below this flat leaf. So I cut out this section of pot, and to my surprise, it wasn't as big as this with these pitchers. They were a lot smaller, but there was a growth point underneath. And over time now, these pitchers have developed. So rather than sort of just leaving that leaf and sort of allowing those pitchers to develop underneath, I just allow the plant to sort of grow outwards by cutting out this section of pot. So I didn't want to sort of disturb the plant in any way. But yeah, I'm very, very happy with this plant. As I said, it has exceeded my expectations. It really has spread out. And to me, what this plant has demonstrated to me is that it's more the width, I think. I don't think root depth, it doesn't really need much root depth. It's more the width, so it can spread out. And these pots over here, these are only plastic pots. They're only, I'd say, about 15 centimetres high. Not even that. It's either between 10 and 15 centimetres high. So this just goes to show that they don't need deep pots. Okay? Let's just zoom in here on this picture. Love it. Beautiful. Now here's another thing as well. So if you do see these growth points, like you can see here, and you see these non-carnivorous leaves, what you can do, you can take off one of those leaves very carefully. Only do this after all the pitches have developed, like you can see here. And then that's exactly what I did over here. I placed that flat leaf into the peat moss, and that was about, say, 2 months ago. Let's just zoom in here a bit. But to my surprise, I'm starting to see some shoots coming out from that flat leaf. So guys, if you do see those flat leaves, try this out and see how you go with it. As you can see, you have to be very, very patient with Cephalotus. You know, so long as you give them the right growing conditions, they really will reward you with beautiful pitcher growth. You know, you may get those many small pitchers starting to form around the initial stem, as in the case with these two plants. Or you may start to see those pitchers starting to form some distance away from the parent plant with the underground branches or roots. And that's what makes this plant so, as well as being curious, so exciting, because you just don't know exactly where those pitchers are going to start to form. Also, make sure that if you do start to see that flat leaf right up against the edge of the pot, do whatever you can to allow the formation of those pitchers. And that's what I did right here by taking out that section of pot. Do that and wait until late winter, early spring, when you can start to repot them. And of course, don't forget those flat leaves, okay guys? Put them into your peat moss and you might be surprised with new plant growth. So now that you have an idea of how my plants have grown, I'm going to now discuss the growing conditions that I gave these plants to get to where they are right now. So let's start talking about the potting medium that I've used for my plants. In my case, I've used 100% peat moss. So I know that may come as a surprise to some of you out there, because online there are millions of recipes out there suggesting, you know, mixing propagating sand in there and perlite and different ratios with the peat moss. But this was actually suggested to me by my supplier who lives in WA, Western Australia. And as you can see, the plants are quite happy. Now, that makes it easy if you guys want to start growing these plants. Just get that peat moss. I've only used this 10 centimetre high pots. What I also did before I used this peat moss is I actually rinsed it out a couple of times. I just filled a bucket with, well, didn't fill it up, just put some rainwater into a bucket. I placed that peat moss into the bucket in my hands, and I just sort of squeezed out the air, made it nice and damp, and I just squeezed out all the excess water. I did that a couple of times, and that just removes any sort of plant spores or fungal spores which can grow around your Cephalotus. Remember, these plants are quite small, so you don't want to see sort of mold or anything else growing around the plants and overshadowing your Cephalotus. And the fact that over the years that all that's growing here are the Cephalotus and pretty much nothing else suggests I did a pretty good job there of just rinsing out that peat moss. So I mentioned before how I used 100% peat moss for my plants. So it's important to understand that peat moss just by itself doesn't have any aeration in there. So it's quite susceptible to being waterlogged. And if you've done a little bit of research about Cephalotus, they're notorious for suddenly dying from being overwatered. And that's why if you're going to be using 100% peat moss for your potting medium for Cephalotus, to use a controlled way of watering your plants. And that's why I've used the wicking method to water my plants. So I've just used polyester fibers here, which I've inserted into the base of the pot, and I placed those wicks into a water source, and through capillary action, that keeps the peat moss nice and damp without being overwatered. Okay. Now, there's a lot of recipes out there, as I mentioned, indicating how much propagating sand or perlite to mix with your peat moss for Cephalotus, and there's a good reason for adding sand or perlite to the peat moss, and that's to aerate the peat moss. And by having more air pockets within the peat moss, it sort of reduces the chances of your plant suddenly dying because of being overwatered. Now, if you're going to be, there's a couple of ways of actually watering Cephalotus. You can use the wicking method, or you can use the water tray method. Now, if you're going to be placing your pots into a tray, it's important that you add some perlite or propagating sand within the peat moss. As I said, it aerates it, and it's going to reduce the chances of sort of getting overwatered. Now, I suggest just using no more than 2 centimeters of either rainwater, distilled water, or reverse osmosis filtered water. That's going to ensure that the water level doesn't go too high on your pot, which reduces, as I said, waterlogging the growing medium. Now, if you've got a high pot, if the walls are higher than 2 centimeters, I suggest drilling some holes on the side of your tray. Now, especially if you're growing your plants outdoors when you don't have control of rain, even though the water level goes up, it's going to sort of drain out on the side. But if you don't have those drainage holes, if you have some nice rain, the water level is going to go up and it's going to shock your plant, and that might even kill it. So just be aware of those points if you're using the water tray method. Now, something to be aware of as well, it's important to sort of be aware of the conditions that you're growing in and how high the temperatures get if you're growing your plants outdoors. So here in Sydney, Australia, particularly in summer, we do get high temperatures here, sometimes up to 40 degrees. So it's important that you regularly fill your water tray, say in the morning, and repeating that same method the next morning, or even watering it twice, probably in the same day. That just ensures that the peat moss doesn't sort of dry out too much. Now, I go to work in the morning, do my morning shift, so I'll make sure if I was to use my water tray method, I'd fill that water up to the right level. I'd come home in the afternoon and it'd probably be all dried out because of the high evaporation, but I'd know that the peat moss would be nice and damp still. But of course, if it starts to change colour or it starts to get a little bit dry, just pour some more water in there. Now, if you're living in a cooler environment where there's less evaporation rate, you could probably get away with not watering your tray for a couple of days because the water would stay in there for longer. Or you could even sort of not water your plant for 1 or 2 days because the less evaporation would mean your peat moss would stay nice and damp for longer. So there's just a few things to be aware of if you're using the water tray method, okay? Now, just before I go, I just wanted to show you this picture of Cephalotus growing in its native habitat. You can see how they're growing on this ledge, and there's a bit of a slope to it. So that indicates that they like good drainage around their roots. They like to have water around the roots, but not too much. And that probably explains why Cephalotus are prone to suddenly dying from overwatering. So I just wanted to show you ways, if you're going to use the wicking method, how you could position your pot and actually water your plants. So I've just got here a disposable drink container, one of those that's got a lid on it. So what you could do, now this one here is actually too small, but you can actually position your pot into there and have the wicks hanging down, and you can just basically fill up that water in there, and that water level could be quite high, and that could sort of last longer without you having to re-water than a tray method, which is shallower, okay? And what I like about it is you could put the lid on it, and that could provide nice humidity for your plants. So Cephalotus do like humidity because they live quite low to the ground, and where there is quite high humidity. And the good thing about using the water tray method is that it does provide nice humidity through the evaporation of the water. Yeah, so that's one way of doing it. Now, Another way you could do is you could probably use these kitchen bags, resealable bags. You could fill some water up in there and just place that, let's have a look, under, place your wicks into the bag like that. Just make sure that there's water in the actual bag, and you could sort of position that into another bigger container just to keep that water nice and cool, especially if you're growing these outdoors, okay? Just put it into another bigger container. Not sure what you could use for that. Not sure, just another bigger pot, I suppose, and somehow position that inside the bigger pot. Okay, so this is how where I grow my plants outside. As I said, I grow my plants outdoors all year round, and I've just basically got the wicks down there on the bottom going into these PVC pipes. That's got water in them, okay, and the water level in those pipes remains constant, so I just basically sit and forget these plants and basically have more time to actually enjoy looking at them. You can see here, just with this western sun setting, look how beautifully those lids show up, the variegation in there. Some of them are quite translucent as well, some of those lids on those plants, on those pictures. But yeah, they really do light up with that sunlight. So out here they're probably getting around about 6 hours of direct sunlight. When I first started growing these plants, I had shade cloth over them because that was what I was suggested by my supplier, because being low to the ground, these plants can't be too sort of fussy with how much light they get, so they can sort of tolerate shaded light or sort of filtered light or direct sunlight like this. So I have noticed when they are in direct sunlight, they're more colourful, more brightly coloured, the pictures. And when they're sort of got less sun or they're growing in filtered light, the pictures are they're sort of quite larger, but they're not as brightly coloured as the ones growing straight in the sun or with plenty of sunlight.